Today guys, we are going to be updating the top 10 worst villain abilities video. Obviously since the last time, Count Dooku has been added to the game and different heroes and villains have received buffs and nerfs. Leave a like if you enjoy guys and let me know your least favourite villain ability, so remember only dark side villains in this video. Let me know your least favourite ability for them in the comments section, maybe even tell me your full list. Let's get into it. Number 10 is For the Hunts for Boba Fett, and I always find with the number 10 spot in these videos, the ability itself is pretty decent, it's just one of the worst in the game when compared to others, and that's where For the Hunt lies here. It's a good ability in some cases, it allows you to get unlimited jetpack for a while and also reveals the location of enemies, but overall if you compare it to some of the better villain abilities which I'll be covering in a future video, it's just kind of average. It just adds on to the jetpack and allows you to see enemies with Boba Fett, but he can usually see them most of the time anyway when he's flying around. But all the Boba lovers are going to hate me because at the number 9 spot we have another Boba Fett ability, and that is the Concussion Rocket. Underwhelming to say the least. When you go with heroes usually you're looking for firepower, and this doesn't add much firepower, it just blinds enemies for a short period of time and that's about it. You can catch enemies off guard pretty easily while flying around with Boba, it's pretty hard to reach up and kill him. So all this does is makes it that bit harder for the enemies. Yes, I like it, but I'd rather have Boba with maybe something a bit more that he can use to actually kill them. He has the rocket barrage. What else does he have? His blaster. He needs something more. Emperor Palpatine's Electrocute is at the number 8 spot, and it's always a situational ability. Yes, if your enemies are stood right in front of you, they're still. It usually works, but if enemies jump around or maybe rolling, then it doesn't always electrocute them. It's just another stun. We all know how annoying stuns are in this game. And when compared to Palpatine's other two abilities, the Electrocute is definitely the weakest of the three. Vader's Force Choke is at the number 7 spot, and still to this day, this is the third installment of this video series now for the worst villain abilities, and still Vader's Force Choke is glitchy. It can leave you pretty vulnerable, but sometimes it just starts glitching out on screen. You'll know what I mean if you've been through this before. It's very, very annoying. If you time this right and there's no other enemies in the vicinity, nobody can shoot at you, so being vulnerable doesn't really matter, but if you only manage to pick up maybe 2 or 3 enemies, the other one can keep firing at you and you can't really do much about it. Iden's Pulse Cannon is at the number 6 spot, and I always say with this Pulse Cannon it's the layout. We look for simple UIs, a bit like the Pulse Cannon in Battlefront 1, and I don't know what they were thinking with the Pulse Cannon in Battlefront 2, but they've made it so complicated. Half of the time I don't know when to actually fire this thing. It's just very time consuming to use. You have to charge up so much and it doesn't really indicate at which part you should be firing. I know some pro Iden players out there probably love this thing, but for me, when compared to her Droid Shock and also her shield, it's the weakest out of the 3 abilities and definitely one of the weakest abilities in the game in general. Now this is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Phasma's Staff Strikes are at the number 5 spot. Usually these are like number 1 or number 2 on the list, but in the recent January updates, they got fixed. They seem to lock on now, and they move a lot faster. I don't know why they didn't just do this a year ago, and they're actually pretty fun to use. They're still on this list because they can leave you very vulnerable, and if there's a lot of blasters nearby, even when you use one of these things, people are still going to damage you a lot, and it's hard for Phasma to get that health back because her health card is linked to the Staff Strikes. But obviously it's only Phasma, it's not like she's a Force user, so I think like this ability works, it's not too overpowered, and I am happier with the Staff Strikes now. They're never going to be one of the best in the game, so it's an improvement, which is good. Grievous's Thrust Surge is at the number 4 spot, and when this works, when it actually locks onto the enemy and does the damage and in some cases kills them, it's one of the best in the game. But it's very glitchy. Sometimes, or I say most of the time, I'd probably say 70% of the time for me, I'm just going around like a windmill in circles and Grievous doesn't lock on, and even if he does lock on, by this point you've been so vulnerable you probably ended up dying. The amount of times I use this in Galactic Assault, which I probably shouldn't do, but hey, isn't that what abilities are for, you know, to use them in game? But you probably shouldn't use this in Galactic Assault because you'll be so vulnerable spinning around, and I've just ended up dying. It's unfortunate, and with Grievous being like the most unique hero in the game, I wish his abilities just worked properly. Kylo's Frenzy is higher on this list than it was the last time. It's at the number 3 spot. Frenzy was supposed to get fixed in the recent updates. I feel it's got worse. Maybe that's just me, but it's never locking on anymore to any enemies. It's just missing them completely and not doing the damage. The original plan for Kylo's Frenzy was to have him jump from one enemy to another with this. You can do that in arcade very easily because that's with bots, but in multiplayer it's like he just goes to one enemy, does a few strikes, sometimes doesn't even hit them, and in the same case takes a lot of damage back. This needs a serious fix, and maybe if they can pull off something like what they did to Phasma's Staff Strikes, then we could be in a good situation here, but right now it's a very, very situational ability. The number 2 spot breaks my heart, but Maul's Saber Throw. It's getting worse and worse, I feel. Is that just me? It still doesn't lock on. At launch this thing was amazing, or at least I found it amazing. Now it just doesn't seem to hit enemies. When you're in a crowded corridor and there's so many people there, it can't fail to miss. But crowded corridors aren't around all the time. So when I use this, it can directly hit the enemy and it does some pretty good damage when it hits. But Maul, most of the time, can't seem to throw his lightsaber. It's unfortunate, and Maul being my favourite villain personally, I know I ranked Palpatine higher in the list, but if it came down to who I'd personally rather use, even though Palpatine is better, I'd say Maul. And imagine how good Maul would be if this ability worked. The number 1 spot, I don't think this has changed from the last video, it's Grievous's Unrelenting Advance. It works better now, like you can actually block incoming blaster fire, which was a problem last time, you just took so much damage from it. The issue really is just how vulnerable it leaves you. You kind of just stand there with your spinning lightsabers, enemies can come up behind you. The damage output isn't huge as well, even with star cards I find. When you compare this to Obi-Wan's rush, which he goes dashing forward at a quick speed and then can block and get some significant damage off that and also do damage with his lightsaber, it's just nothing in comparison to that. When you compare it to Rey's dash ability as well, Grievous's is just pretty weak. To make this better, maybe just have a larger damage output for it. Right now, it just leaves Grievous so vulnerable, and when I activate it, 90% of the time I end up dead. But thank you for watching everyone, let me know did you agree or disagree with my list here of the worst villain abilities. I'll see you next time for the best villain abilities, watch out for that.